Montana, 1884. Nobody in Carver's Creek knew what Silas Holt had been building in the upper Stillwater country for 15 winters. He had ridden out of town at 21 with a single-packed horse, a worn saddle, and a leather satchel of seed money he had been left by an uncle in St. Louis. He had ridden north past the ridge with the look of a man who did not intend to be back soon. The town had watched him go and forgotten him by spring. He had returned, 15 winters later, on a late autumn morning at the head of a string of 4 matched bay horses and a wagon driver named Dunmore, who did not say a word to anyone he passed. The town did not forget him a second time. They did not know what he owned. They knew it was a great deal. There was a story, told by a freight rider from Helena who had taken a wrong turn the previous summer, of a long valley running north along the Stillwater, with a quarter-mile stone and log house at the head of it, and a fenced pasture so wide a man could not see across it. The freight rider had been turned around politely at the boundary fence by a foreman who had told him the country beyond was Holt's, and that no one rode it but Holt's men. The town had filed the story under things they did not entirely believe, and would mention only to each other when the right amount of whiskey was present. Silas Holt did not confirm it. He did not deny it. He did not offer his land to the conversation at all. He had not come back for the conversation. He had not come back for the daughters of the bankers in Helena who had begun within an hour of his return to write letters of polite acquaintance to be delivered by their fathers. He had not come back for the 2 widows in the boarding house who had taken to walking past the mercantile at the hour he was known to collect his mail. He had not come back for the eldest Ashworth Whitlock's sister, who had ridden into town the day after his return in a carriage with her wealthy husband, and had inquired, with great composure, whether Mr. Holt might consider an introduction. He had come back for the youngest Ashworth, which the town agreed, when they finally agreed on anything, was the one thing he could not possibly want, because in the 4 years since her second betrothed had died of fever inside a month of asking her father's blessing, Carver's Creek had decided, slowly and then with the cold certainty of a verdict, that Imogen Ashworth was cursed. He told himself, riding out toward her claim on his first Sunday back, that he was simply paying a courtesy call. He nearly believed it. That was 3 days after he had returned. The Ashworth claim lay at the southern edge of the town, where the prairie began to rise toward the foothills and where the small log house her father had built had stood, weathered and unimproved, since she had been a child of 9. He saw her first from the road, 200 paces out, before he had reached the gate. She was in the small fenced corral beside the house, alone, with her sleeves rolled to the elbow despite the cold, working a sorrel colt at the end of a long line. The colt was sweating and uncertain. She was speaking to it in a low voice that did not carry to the road, but that the colt clearly heard. As he watched, the colt stopped fighting the line, lowered its head, and walked to her shoulder of its own accord. She did not turn when his horse stopped at the gate. She finished what she was doing. She tied the colt to the post. She wiped her hands on her apron. Only then did she walk to the gate to look at him. She was taller than he had remembered, which he had not expected to notice. Her dark auburn hair was pinned simply at the nape of her neck. Her gray eyes did not flinch at the sight of a man she did not know on a horse she could not place. "Mr. Holt," she said. He had not announced himself. The town had announced him for her. "Miss Ashworth. You'll have heard." "I have heard." "And you came anyway." "I came specifically." She looked at him for a long moment. He held the look. She unlatched the gate and stepped through it and stood beside his stirrup. "Then come in," she said. "You may as well see what you have ridden out for." He dismounted. He led his horse to the small water trough beside the corral. The colt watched him from the rail without alarm, which was, Silas Holt noted with private, quiet satisfaction, something of a recommendation. They walked the small property together in the pale autumn light. She showed him the fence line her father had set, the place where the spring rose, the patch of plowed garden she had planted in May and was now putting under for winter, the windbreak of young pines at the north edge of the claim. She spoke about the land the way a woman speaks who knows it precisely and has been the only person to know it for many years. He did not interrupt. He listened. When she had finished, they stood at the far corner of the property where the prairie began. "Why have you come, Mr. Holt?" she said. He did not look at her. He looked at the prairie. "I have been preparing for 15 years, he said, "to be in a position to come." She was quiet. "That is not an answer," she said. "No, it is not." She accepted that with the small composure of a woman who had long ago stopped expecting straight answers from men. "Will you take supper with me?" she said. "Yes." They walked back to the house. The house was a single room of squared logs with a lean-to kitchen at the back, a stone hearth at one wall, a narrow bed at the other, a worn pine table in the middle, and a single closed door at the far end. The roof was sound. The chinking was new. The floor had been swept that morning. He noticed the closed door at the far end of the room within the first minute. "My father's room," she said when she saw him notice. "He died in there 4 winters ago. I have not been in since." He nodded once. He did not ask. She watched him not ask, and something in her shoulders eased by a 1/4 inch. He stayed a week, at her offer, and at the bunkhouse end of the lean-to, and then a second week, and the town began to notice. He noticed that they were noticing. He did not change his routine. He rode into the mercantile every other morning for what supplies he claimed the small house needed. He ignored the sidelong looks the men gave him at the hitching post. He ignored the eldest Ashworth Whitlock sisters' carriage that drove past the front of the mercantile on the second morning with the curtain pulled back just enough for the eldest sister to see him and to be seen. He went home each evening to the small claim, and to the woman the town said no man should marry. He had been there 4 days when he noticed the first thing. On Sunday morning before he was awake, she walked the half-mile up the small rise behind the house to the wooden marker that stood under a single cottonwood at the property line. He saw her from the lean-to window. She carried a small bunch of late-blooming yellow wildflowers in her hand. She knelt by the marker. She spoke for perhaps 10 minutes, the words not loud enough to carry, but the cadence unmistakable as language. He understood after the 3rd Sunday that the language was French. He noticed, the 2nd week, that she had mended a tear in the cuff of his work coat without comment. He had snagged it on the wire of the south fence on Tuesday. By Thursday morning, when he reached for it on the peg, the tear had been closed with stitches finer than any he had ever seen in his life. She did not mention it. He did not thank her, because he understood that being thanked would have embarrassed her. He noticed, the 3rd week, that the sorrel colt, the one she had been working in the corral on the day he arrived, had been sent to her by the largest rancher in the county, a man named Tobias Ferris, who had given up on the colt as unbreakable and had told a friend over whiskey that he had sent it to the cursed Ashworth woman because if she lost a finger working it, the territory would be no poorer. The colt now followed her without a line, came to her whistle from across the corral, and tolerated her saddle without protest. Ferris did not yet know. He noticed, the 4th week, that on certain nights she rose without lighting a lamp and left the house by the back door with a basket over her arm. He had heard her the first time and assumed it was a personal matter and turned over. The second time he had risen and stood at the window. He had watched her walk along the road into the dark of the town and stop at 3 houses he later learned belonged to families who had less than she had. He had watched her set a small parcel on each step and walk on without knocking. She had returned an hour before sunrise with an empty basket and had gone back to sleep. He had not mentioned any of it. He had told himself, on the day he had ridden out from his land to come back to Carver's Creek, that he was returning to confirm a memory. He had stopped believing that within the 1st week. The boy came on a Thursday afternoon. He could not have been more than 12. He held the small folded note in front of him, at arm's length, the way a child holds an offering he has been told he must deliver and has decided he does not want to know the contents of. Silas was at the corral. He saw the boy stop at the gate, and he saw Imogen come out of the house to meet him, and he saw the boy hand her the note and turn and run back toward town without waiting for an answer. Imogen stood at the gate with the note in her hand for a long time before she opened it. She read it once. She folded it. She did not look at Silas. She walked back into the house. He gave her an hour. When he came in, she was at the kitchen table mending a tin pail with a small soldering iron and a length of solder, which she did not usually mend with a man in the house. The note was folded on the table beside the pail. "Imogen," he said. She looked up. He almost never said her name. They both knew it. The note. Was it trouble? She set the soldering iron down carefully. "My eldest sister has written to inform me that she has retained a lawyer in Helena. The lawyer's opinion is that the original deed of this claim, which was in my father's name, requires the signed consent of all 4 surviving Ashworth daughters before any one of them may continue to reside on it. She has asked for my signature on the enclosed document, which transfers my interest to herself and to her 2 younger sisters who have already signed. She suggests, with regret, that I find lodging in a city back east. She has enclosed the fare." She did not raise her voice. She spoke as though she were reading aloud from a paper she had been handed and had not chosen to comment on. "And you," he said, "I will not sign." "That will not stop her." "No." "Why now?" She looked at him then, fully, for the first time since he had come into the kitchen. "Because," she said, "you are here." He nodded slowly. He had suspected. "You should know what they will say," she said. "What they have been saying." "I have heard most of it." "You have heard the conclusion. You have not heard the parts that the town has used to arrive at it." "Tell me." She did not look away. "My mother died on the 3rd day after I was born. She had been ill through the last 2 months of carrying me. She did not survive the birth. The town concluded then only that it was a sad winter, because my mother had been well loved. My father did not let me hear until I was perhaps 13, the older women who had begun to say that my mother had given her life to bring me into the world and that no good child was bought at such a cost. He was quiet. My father died of a fever when I was 20, she went on. He had been sound until the autumn he turned 48. He died in 3 weeks. The town did not yet blame me. The fever took 2 other men that month. Edward Carmody was the son of a friend of my father's. He had been kind to me since we were children, and he asked for my hand the summer I turned 22. He was thrown from his horse on the road from his father's ranch 9 days before the wedding. He had ridden that horse every day for 6 years. She paused. Henry Webb came to my father's grave 3 months later, having been a widower with 2 small daughters, and asked if I would consider being a mother to them. He took fever within 10 days of my saying yes. He was buried 3 weeks after Edward. She had not raised her voice through any of this. The town decided I was cursed, she said. My sisters were already married by then. They decided to agree. Silas Holt did not say he was sorry. He did not say it was not her fault. He had already decided what he was going to do, and saying it out loud would have felt to him like the kind of promise a man made when he was not yet certain he could keep it, and he intended to keep it. He reached across the kitchen table and set his hand for one full breath on the back of her wrist, where it rested beside the soldering iron. He drew his hand back. He did not speak. She looked at his hand on the table for a long moment after he had drawn it back. The sisters came on Sunday afternoon. There were 2 carriages. The eldest came in the first, alone with her husband's driver, in a dark green silk traveling dress and a bonnet trimmed with 3 small pheasant feathers. The 2 younger sisters came in the second, in matching dove gray, with the wife of the second sister's husband and a maid neither of them needed. They were dressed for an occasion. They had decided what the occasion was before they had arrived. Imogen had seen the dust on the road from the kitchen window and had said only, "They are here." She did not change her dress. She did not put up her hair. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked out the front door of the small house and into the dirt of the front yard. And she stood there in her plain dark wool dress and her work apron with her hands folded at her waist, and waited. Silas Holt came out of the lean-to door behind her and stood 3 paces to her right. The eldest Ashworth Whitlock descended from her carriage with the patient assistance of her driver. She crossed the yard at a measured pace. The other two stayed at the carriage. The eldest stopped 4 paces in front of her sister. "Imogen," to Beatrice, "you will have read my note." "I have read it." "And you have not signed it." "I have not." "You are aware that you have made it necessary." "I am aware." The eldest sister's eyes moved past Imogen to Silas, taking him in for the first time at close range. Her expression did not change. The expression of a woman who had spent her life mastering her face did not change in front of strangers. "Mr. Holt, I had hoped to have the pleasure of an introduction under happier circumstances. I am sorry to find you here. I do not believe you have been fully informed about the family circumstances. I would like, if you will permit me, to explain." "You may not," Silas said. The eldest sister blinked once. "I beg your pardon." "You may not explain to me what I have already taken 3 weeks to observe." A small silence. The 2 younger sisters at the carriage did not move. "Mr. Holt, my sister is a woman of profound and well-documented misfortune. I do not say this to wound her. I say it because the town has said it, and because it is true. 2 men of excellent character have died in connection with their attachment to her. We have, as her family, an obligation to prevent a third. You have an obligation to your inheritance. You have decided to call it concern. I do not blame you for the choice. I will not allow you to act on it on this ground." "And by what right do you speak for the disposition of my family's land?" Silas Holt took off his hat. He held it in his left hand at his side. He did not look at the eldest sister. He looked at Imogen. He walked the 3 paces between them, and in the dirt of the front yard, in full view of the eldest Ashworth Whitlock, and of the 2 sisters at the carriage, and of the driver, and of the maid, and of 3 men on horseback who had stopped on the road outside the gate to watch, he went down on one knee. He did not bow his head. He looked up at her face. "Imogen Ashworth, I have ridden 15 winters and a great deal of country to be in a condition to ask this. Will you marry me?" The yard was perfectly silent. Imogen looked at her eldest sister, who did not move, and who could not, in her dress and her bonnet and her composure, do anything at all. Imogen looked at Silas. "Yes," she said. "Then by that right," Silas said, still on one knee, his eyes still on her face, "I will speak for the disposition of this ground." He rose. He put his hat back on. He turned to the eldest sister. "You may take your carriages home, Mrs. Whitlock. I will have a letter delivered to your husband by tomorrow noon outlining the arrangement. He will find it more than satisfactory." The eldest sister did not move for several seconds. Then she did. She turned without speaking, walked back across the yard to her carriage, climbed in without assistance, and pulled the door shut. The 2 younger sisters, who had not spoken at all, followed. The carriages drew away. The 3 men on horseback at the gate rode back toward town at a hurry, with news. By supper time the entire town of Carver's Creek would know. That evening, after the supper neither of them ate, Silas brought her to the kitchen table. "There are things you should know now," he said, "that I would have liked to tell you first." "Tell me." "The land in the upper Stillwater country, the valley north of the ridge, the 4-bay horse string I came back with. I own 23,000 acres. I have a house there that I have not yet shown to anyone. I have spent 15 years building it, and the herd and the trade that supports it. I came back to Carver's Creek with the intention of asking you a question you could not, in fairness, have answered without seeing what I had been preparing." "Then why did you ask me before I had seen it?" "It's because your sister forced the question, and because I needed your answer to be uncomplicated by it." She looked at him for a long moment. "You should know that I would have said yes to the man you were when you rode in on a single horse with no land to your name." "I know." "Then why did you build it?" "Because I had told myself the day I rode out that I would not return until I could come back as a man you could choose without anyone in this town being able to call you a fool for the choosing." She was quiet for a long moment. "You did not need to build that much." "I know," he said. "I built it anyway." She opened her father's room that evening, alone, before they went to bed. She had been telling herself for 4 winters that she had been preserving the room as he had left it. She had said this to her sisters when they had asked, with the polite firmness that ended the conversation. She had said it to her oldest friend in town, a woman whose name appeared rarely in this story, and who had asked once, gently, whether perhaps she might consider opening the room and packing his things away. She had said it to herself on each of the 4 anniversaries. She had not entirely believed any of it. She stood at the closed door of the room with her hand on the worn iron latch. She lifted it. She went in. The room smelled of cedar and old paper and the faint mineral trace of the lamp oil her father had favored and had not been able to find again in his last years. His coat was still on the peg by the bed. His Bible was on the small table beside the head of the bed. The patchwork quilt her mother had finished a month before she died was folded at the foot of it. She did not cry. She had cried 4 winters ago in this room and had not since. She did not cry now, but she stood for a long time in the doorway, and then she walked to the small table, and she picked up her father's Bible, and she opened the front cover, and she read in his handwriting the date of her mother's death, and the date of her own birth 3 days after, and the date of his marriage, and the date he had written underneath all of them. And Imogen, who is the gift I did not deserve to be given. She closed the Bible. She set it back on the table. She went out. She left the door open. Silas was at the kitchen table. He looked up when she came in. He did not ask. She crossed to him and sat down across the table, and she said, "I will keep the claim. I will not sell it to my sisters. I will not let them have it. And I will marry you, and I will live with you in the Stillwater country, but the claim is mine, and the door of that room will not be closed again." "All right. You will not argue with me about it." "No, I will not argue." She looked at him for a long moment. "You said you have not shown the Stillwater house to anyone." "No one." "Show me." "Tomorrow." "Yes." He stood. He crossed the kitchen in 2 steps. He did not speak. She did not step back. They were married at the small church in Carver's Creek on the 2nd Sunday of December, with the Reverend Coombs, who asked no unnecessary questions, and the 2 witnesses who were Tobias Ferris, the largest rancher in the county, who had been quietly shamed by the colt he had given up, and the elderly postmaster Henley, who had been kind to her for 19 years without speaking of it. Imogen wore a dress the color of pale wheat that Silas had ordered from a seamstress in Helena before she had known there had been any time to order one, and she pinned her hair with the same plain wooden pins she had used since her father had died. And when the Reverend asked if she took this man, she said yes, without hesitation, which the few of the town who had come to the back pews to watch agreed was the most uncomplicated yes the church had ever heard. The eldest Ashworth Whitlock sister did not attend. The 2 younger sisters did. They did not speak to anyone. They left before the supper. The winter at the Stillwater house was long and full of sound that Imogen had not lived with since her father had been alive. The house, when Silas had first opened the front door for her, had been bigger than she had been prepared for, and quieter and unfinished. He had built only what could be lived in, and had waited to ask her what she wanted for the rest. In February, a letter came from her eldest sister. She read it at the long kitchen table of the Stillwater house, set it down, and said calmly that Beatrice had written to ask forgiveness. Silas asked what had brought her to it. "I suspect it was the part where I wrote her last month that I am with child." Silas went very still. "Are you?" "I am." He pulled his chair around beside hers, and he sat down, and he took the hand that was still holding the letter, and he held it the way a man holds something he had spent 15 winters preparing to be allowed to hold. "The Stillwater house," he said after a while. She laughed. It was the first time he had heard her laugh fully, and without reservation, and it was better than he had expected, which was saying something, because he had spent 15 years preparing not to expect anything at all. In April, on a Tuesday morning, while Silas was out on the long pasture with Dunmore and the colt that had once belonged to Tobias Ferris, and was now bred to one of the Holt mares. Imogen sat at the kitchen table of the small Carver's Creek house, which they had ridden in to inspect for the spring, and she set down her pen, and she put her hand on her belly. The door of her father's room stood open, as it had stood open since the evening she had first walked through it. Above the cottonwood at the property line, a single hawk made one long, slow circle and dropped below the line of the rise, and was gone. And Imogen Holt, who had been the cursed Ashworth daughter and had been told for 4 winters that she was not a woman a man could marry without dying, set down her pen and listened, for the first time in a very long time, without any part of her bracing for it to end.